Right now in America, people with full-time jobs cannot afford a place to sleep. Not unemployed, not between jobs, working and still homeless. Over 3/4 of homes in this country are now unaffordable for the average worker, and the people getting hit aren't who you'd expect. Nurses, warehouse workers, caregivers, retirees, people doing everything right. So, where are they going? Sheds, storage units, RVs, places that were never built for anyone to live in. And here is the part most people don't know yet. The new laws being passed right now aren't solving this. They are making it permanent. This is America's housing crisis. And by the end of this video, you are going to see exactly how bad it has actually gotten and why it keeps getting worse. Let's start with the number that makes everything else make sense. Since 2020, average rents across the United States have gone up between 30% and 50%. In Miami, Phoenix, Austin, and Tampa, that jump exceeded 40% in just a few years. A one-bedroom in most American cities now runs between $400 and $800 a month. A two-bedroom routinely clears $2,000. Here's the number sitting underneath all of that. To comfortably afford a two-bedroom without crossing the 30% of income threshold housing researchers consider safe, a worker needs to earn between $28 and $30 an hour. Most of the workers keeping this economy running earn between $12 and $20. The math doesn't work. It hasn't worked in years. The gap isn't closing. It's getting wider every month. And when the numbers stop working entirely, people don't give up. They adapt. They survive in ways most people would never think to look for, because most people have never had to. And this is where most people have the wrong picture. When we think about homelessness, we think about a tent under a bridge, a shelter line. That image is real, but it only accounts for a fraction of the people who've actually lost stable housing. Researchers call the rest hidden homelessness. These are people with no permanent home who aren't visible anywhere, sleeping in cars behind shopping centers, living in backyard sheds, wired up with an extension cord, staying in storage units after the staff goes home. They drop their kids at school. They pay their car insurance. They clock in for work. Nobody knows because they never show up at a shelter or on a street. They don't appear in the official numbers. The real scale of this is almost certainly much larger than any government data reflects. Now, let's talk about how someone actually ends up there. It almost never happens all at once. It follows a sequence, quiet and brutal. A landlord raises the rent $400 on 30 days' notice. A medical bill shows up that wasn't in the budget. A job disappears. One thing goes wrong without any financial cushion underneath it, and that's enough. Within weeks, someone with a normal apartment and a normal life finds themselves cycling between a friend's couch, their car, and places that were never meant for anyone to sleep in. Take a self-storage unit, built to hold furniture between moves, $50 to $200 a month. For someone who's run out of options, the gap from a $1,700 apartment doesn't feel like settling. It feels like the only door still open. Marcus is a warehouse worker in his mid-40s. After a rent increase he couldn't absorb, he spent 3 months between his truck and a 10 by 10 storage unit. Sleeping bag in the corner, battery-powered fan, padlock on the inside of the door. At work every morning at 6 a.m., nobody he worked with had any idea. What Marcus was doing was also genuinely dangerous. No plumbing, no ventilation, no insulation. In summer, the temperature inside a metal unit can hit over 100 degrees. In winter, it drops to dangerous cold with nothing to slow it down. Most units are filled with flammable materials, and there are no smoke detectors, no sprinklers, no emergency exits. Almost every storage facility in the country explicitly bans people from living in their units, and still people try. That fact alone tells you something about where we are. When someone is choosing between a metal box with no ventilation and nowhere else to go, the metal box wins. Have you seen anything like this in your city? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Storage units aren't the only place people have turned to. Backyard sheds, converted garages, a mattress, a space heater, an extension cord that becomes someone's home for months, sometimes years. In most cities, this is illegal. These structures have no proper wiring, plumbing, insulation, or emergency exits. The people inside live in constant uncertainty, never knowing if today is the day they get pushed into something worse. When these structures are built properly and permitted, they're called accessory dwelling units, ADUs. Some cities are starting to embrace them as part of the solution. But What people are actually living in right now are garden sheds with extension cords. Here's the part that surprises most people. A lot of the people living in these spaces have jobs. They are not people who gave up on work. They're what housing researchers now call the working homeless, a phrase that still sounds like a contradiction to most Americans. In this housing market, it isn't a contradiction. It's a growing category. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, unchanged since 2009. Even in states with higher floors, workers in retail, food service, caregiving, and logistics routinely earn $10 to $15 less than what they'd need to afford basic housing. Researchers estimate that in most states, a full-time minimum wage worker needs 2 or 3 simultaneous jobs just to afford a modest apartment. Working 40 hours a week is no longer enough to guarantee a stable place to sleep. That is not a hypothetical. That is where we are. To understand how we got here, you have to look beyond wages and rent. This is also a supply problem, a structural one building for decades. Housing economists estimate the country is short by millions of affordable units relative to actual demand. Population growth in high-demand cities has outpaced construction. Building costs have risen sharply, and in many cities, zoning laws have made it literally illegal to build smaller, denser, more affordable housing. You cannot legally build a duplex in some neighborhoods. Those rules were designed to protect neighborhood character. What they've actually done is lock lower-income people out of entire cities at the exact moment they have nowhere else to go. When supply is constrained and demand keeps climbing, prices rise. And when they rise far enough, people get pushed out of the formal housing market entirely into the informal one. RVs, sheds, storage units. Housing that exists outside the system because the system stopped building what people need. Large investment firms buying homes in bulk to rent out have added further pressure, pulling inventory from individual buyers in markets already stretched thin. These forces, compounding over years, have produced a housing system that is failing millions of people. Not at the edges, but at its core. And not everyone is being hit the same way. Older Americans are now one of the fastest growing groups facing housing insecurity. The average Social Security check runs between $1,500 and $4,900 a month. A generation ago, that covered the basics with a little room to spare. Today, in many American cities, it doesn't cover rent alone. A retired woman in her late 60s on a fixed income has no good answer for a $300 rent increase. She cannot pick up more hours. She cannot earn more. There is no cushion beyond what she is already drawing. Housing advocates warn the senior homeless population is rising faster than almost any other group, and some projections suggest it could double within a decade. For older people, losing stable housing cuts off access to medications, healthcare, food programs, and the social connections that keep people alive. Losing your home at 70 is categorically different from losing it at 30. The runway to recover is much shorter. The health consequences of living in spaces not built for people are serious and rarely get the attention they deserve. People in vehicles, sheds, and storage units carry a level of chronic stress with real physical effects. Not knowing where you'll sleep, whether you'll be forced to move, whether someone will find you, that kind of anxiety doesn't switch off. Most people in this situation work hard to hide it completely, keeping up a normal appearance at work and around family, because the stigma is real. Maintaining that every single day is exhausting in ways that compound over time. Physically, the risks are immediate. Poor ventilation lets carbon monoxide build up when someone uses a portable heater or propane stove. Extreme heat and extreme cold become direct threats to life. Without regular access to water and sanitation, infections become harder to prevent and treat. Over time, disrupted sleep, sustained stress, a weakened immune system, the damage can become permanent. For families with kids, it goes deeper. Children in unstable housing deal with constant disruptions to school, friendships, and the basic routines kids need to develop well. Teachers are often the first to notice. A child who keeps showing up exhausted can't finish homework because there's no stable place to do it, and seems anxious in ways that go beyond what a kid their age should carry. The research is consistent. Early housing instability affects long-term health, education, and financial stability well into adulthood. Now, here is where the story takes a real turn. Because you might expect that in the face of all this, cities would be focused on building more housing, more shelter, more options, some kind of actual response to the scale of what is happening. Most cities are not doing that. Instead of adjusting zoning or expanding municipal safety nets, local governments across the United States have pivoted to direct legal deterrence. Since 2022, over 140 municipalities have enacted ordinances that classify sleeping in a vehicle as a criminal misdemeanor or a finable civil infraction. This legal shift took structural form following several specific federal and local court challenges that previously restricted cities from clearing encampments or vehicles unless an equivalent number of physical shelter beds were open. By early 2025, legislative adjustments at the state level in places like Tennessee, Texas, and Florida explicitly authorized municipal police departments to bypass shelter capacity verifications entirely. The resulting enforcement data reflects an immediate escalation in asset seizures and citations. The mechanical reality of these ordinances relies heavily on automatic monitoring infrastructure. In cities like San Diego, California, and Phoenix, Arizona, police departments deployed automated license plate readers, or ALPRs, mounted on enforcement cruisers. These systems scan streets in commercial and industrial corridors where unhoused workers frequently park overnight. In San Diego Municipal Code Section 86.0139, which bans vehicle habitation on public streets between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m., led to a 34% increase in citations within the first 12 months of automated tracking. A first-time infraction carries a baseline fine of $100, but under escalating fee structures adopted in 2024, a third violation within a single calendar year automatically triggers a misdemeanor charge and a fine of up to $1,000, accompanied by a mandatory court appearance for individuals utilizing vehicles as an alternative to an average monthly apartment rent that now stands at $1,500 nationally. These financial penalties rapidly compound into absolute asset loss. When a vehicle accumulates more than 5 unpaid parking or habitation citations, state vehicle codes typically authorize immediate impoundment. The cost structure of a vehicle tow is deliberately punitive. Municipal contracts with private towing operators establish an initial hookup fee ranging from $250 to $450. Storage fees accrue daily at rates between $80 and $120. If an individual cannot produce the full cash balance, plus proof of current registration and valid commercial insurance, within 15 business days, the municipality retains the right to title the vehicle for public auction or immediate destruction. According to a 2025 report by Western Legal Aid, approximately 62% of impounded recreational vehicles used for habitation are never reclaimed by their owners due to these extreme cost barriers. The geographical distribution of these enforcement zones actively pushes the working unhoused population out of stable environments and into toxic or isolate urban spaces. When prime public streets are blocked by restrictive signage, vehicles migrate to unimproved industrial zones, container ports, and arterial roadways adjacent to waste processing facilities. This spatial displacement carries documented health costs. A 2024 environmental study conducted in Los Angeles County tracked air particulate levels and chemical exposure among vehicle dwellers forced to park near the Interstate 710 corridor. The data revealed that individuals sleeping in these locations experienced a 40% higher concentration of diesel exhaust inhalation compared to those in residential zones, directly correlating with a spike in acute respiratory infections and cardiovascular distress. Simultaneously, the private sector has mirrored municipal criminalization by systematically closing off alternative options. The self-storage industry, which expanded rapidly between 2020 and 2023, implemented advanced digital surveillance to eliminate human habitation within units. Major corporate operators installed thermal imaging cameras and motion-activated sensors inside facility corridors. These systems identify heat signatures consistent with a human body remaining inside a 10 by 10 metal locker after the standard 10 p.m. gate lockout. When an infraction is detected, facility managers immediately terminate the lease agreement, forfeit the security deposit, and lock out the tenant, frequently leaving the individual on the street without access to their stored belongings. The legal frameworks governing accessory dwelling units, or ADUs have similarly been restricted in a manner that blocks low-income survival. While states like California passed legislation to streamline the construction of backyard cottages, municipal building departments introduced extensive code compliance costs that render them inaccessible to the average family. Installing a permitted, plumbed and insulated ADU in a metropolitan area carries an average regulatory and construction cost exceeding $150,000. Informal backyard setups, such as a standard prefabricated garden shed connected to a primary residence by a standard extension cord, are met with immediate code enforcement citations. Fines for non-permitted residential occupancy range from $500 to $2,500 per day. These enforcement sweeps explicitly prevent families from providing free or low-cost shelter to relatives on fixed incomes, forcing older adults and minimum wage workers back into the competitive and unaffordable commercial market. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics highlights the macroeconomic divergence driving this crisis. While the federal minimum wage remains locked at $7.25 per hour, Consumer Price Index tracking shows that the real cost of basic shelter has outpaced wage growth in every major metropolitan statistical area since 2018. In states with higher localized minimum wages, such as Washington or Massachusetts, where the floor sits around $15 per hour, a full-time worker brings in roughly $2,400 per month before taxes. In these same regions, the average cost of a market-rate one-bedroom apartment is $1,800. After accounting for basic federal payroll taxes, utilities, food, and mandatory vehicle expenses needed to commute to work, the net balance is negative. The structural gap between what the economy pays for service labor and what the real estate market demands for basic shelter has created a permanent class of employed individuals who are structurally excluded from traditional housing. This systemic failure is increasingly evident within the population of senior citizens relying on fixed incomes. The Social Security Administration stated that the average monthly retirement benefit in 2025 was approximately $1,900. In high-cost urban centers where job growth remains concentrated, this entire sum is insufficient to cover the combined cost of rent and mandatory health insurance premiums. Because seniors cannot scale their income through additional labor hours due to physical limitations, a single annual rent increase of 10% serves as a direct eviction mechanism. The National Alliance to End Homelessness reported that individuals over the age of 55 now represent the fastest-growing demographic within the unhoused population, accounting for nearly 30% of all recorded cases nationally. The institutional response to this data has not been an expansion of subsidized housing vouchers or public construction. Instead, cities have intensified localized sweeps, deploying coordinated task forces comprising municipal police, sanitation workers, and private contractors. These operations are heavily funded. Municipal budget data from 2025 shows that cities with populations over 500,000 allocate an average of $15 million annually specifically for the physical clearance of streets and parking areas. During these clearances, personal property that cannot be immediately moved by the owner is designated as abandoned waste and destroyed in compaction trucks. This includes critical survival gear, identity documentation, prescription medications, and communication devices, which effectively resets an individual's economic progress to zero and ensures that the cycle of displacement remains continuous. The systemic expansion of punitive ordinances has triggered acute regulatory and legal friction between distinct tiers of governance, private property owners, and emergency services. This conflict manifested directly following the June 2024 United States Supreme Court decision in City of Grants Pass v. Johnson, which established that local enforcement of anti-camping and public lodging bans does not violate the Eighth Amendment, even in the complete absence of available shelter beds. In the wake of this landmark ruling, municipal authorities across the Sun Belt and West Coast executed a series of structural sweeps that explicitly target vehicle dwellers. However, the operational reality of these clearances has revealed an immediate crisis of municipal coordination, infrastructure capacity, and civil liability. www.ijpr.org. A Show 1A primary flashpoint in this enforcement push is the collision between federal mandates and local police actions. Under Title 42 of the United States Code, Emergency medical workers are required to stabilize patients regardless of housing status. Yet, the aggressive relocation of vehicle dwellers directly undercuts continuity of care. According to records obtained from county health departments in California and Arizona, municipal sweeps conducted throughout 2025 and 2026 resulted in the systematic disruption of medical treatment for thousands of unsheltered workers. When an RV or modified van is towed during a morning sweep, prescription medications for chronic conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, and asthma are routinely locked inside impound yards or discarded as debris. Hospital discharge planners in Los Angeles and Phoenix have documented a direct 28% increase in emergency room readmissions among unhoused individuals within 3 weeks of localized vehicle clearance operations. Transferring the fiscal burden from municipal sanitation budgets directly onto public hospital systems. Simultaneously, a sharp legal conflict has emerged between municipal governments and religious institutions attempting to mitigate the crisis through safe parking initiatives. Under the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, or RLUIPA, churches and non-profit organizations have asserted a constitutional right to utilize their private parking lots as temporary overnight sanctuaries for individuals living in cars and RVs. Municipal code enforcement agencies have countered these initiatives by deploying zoning restrictions and public nuisance declarations. In cities like Austin, Texas, and Denver, Colorado, churches face daily fines reaching up to $500 for permitting overnight vehicle occupancy on asphalt lots zoned strictly for commercial or ecclesiastical assembly. This dispute reached a formal impasse when multiple religious coalitions filed federal lawsuits against local code enforcement boards, arguing that municipal definitions of urban blight cannot legally supersede religious exercise and the private provision of mutual aid. The operational breakdown of these punitive frameworks is further detailed in municipal expenditure audits. Data from 2025 indicates that the cost of processing a single unhoused individual through the criminal legal system, encompassing police deployment, administrative booking, public defender assignment, and short-term incarceration, averages $4,200 per incident. In contrast, the administrative cost of providing an operational safe parking space equipped with basic sanitation, trash collection, and a social services connections sits at roughly $100 per vehicle annually. Despite this massive fiscal disparity, municipal appropriations for enforcement continue to eclipse housing stabilization funds. In major metropolitan areas, funding specialized police trespass units grew by an average of 18% between 2024 and 2026. While municipal funding for low-income rental subsidies and emergency shelter expansion experienced flat or declining growth during the same period, the tracking of families with minor children experiencing vehicle homelessness reveals a secondary, deeply hidden bureaucratic mechanism. Under the federal McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, public school districts are legally required to maintain enrollment and transportation options for students lacking fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime housing. However, the rapid acceleration of overnight parking bans and 72-hour abandonment tags means that families are forced to relocate across school district boundaries multiple times within a single grading period. School tracking data from the 2025 school year indicates that over 45,000 children living in vehicles experienced 3 or more school changes within 9 months. This high rate of mobility directly correlates with dropouts and academic regression. Furthermore, the persistent threat of vehicle impoundment has increased the involvement of Child Protective Services, or CPS. In states like Florida and Texas, code enforcement officers who locate minors living in commercial storage, lockers, or unregistered RVs are legally mandated to report the living conditions as instances of environmental neglect, initiating dependency proceedings that frequently separate children from working parents whose sole crime is an inability to clear the 30% Housing Affordability Index. The situation has reached an absolute dead end within the legal apparatus itself, because the majority of citations issued under overnight sleeping bans carry monetary fines that cannot be paid by individuals earning minimum wage. Local court dockets are chronically overwhelmed by non-payment warrants. In municipalities with populations exceeding 300,000, Outstanding warrants for minor quality-of-life offences have created an administrative backlog that stalls standard criminal proceedings. Legal aid organisations have filed class action challenges emphasising that the collection of these debts is statistically impossible, yet municipalities maintain the policies to justify the ongoing seizure of vehicular property. This cyclical mechanism does not deter vehicle residency. It simply strips the working unhoused population of their primary means